The following talk is offered freely to ensure that no one is ever denied access to these practices and to these teachings. If you feel inspired to make a donation to support this offering, you can go to my website at jonathanfoust.com. While you're there, you can also sign up for a monthly newsletter designed to support you in your practice. Thank you, and enjoy.
Namaste, good evening. It's such a beautiful evening out there. I, first of all, want to thank you for coming back. It's nice to be able to legally look at you as well. I want to share with you a story. It's a rather brief story, but it really speaks to a little bit of the mystery of this practice. It's the story of a young man who played the cello, and he loved the instrument. In part, he was really inspired by his mother, who played professionally. He worked very hard at it, and then one time he came across these two pieces that he learned very, very quickly, and he couldn't understand why these two pieces felt like he was almost remembering them. He brought it up to his mother. He mentioned it to his mother, and she listened, and she got this big smile on her face. And she said, "I practiced those pieces when I was pregnant and carrying you." And that story is from a book called The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, that speaks about how much we are actually receive and are conscious of. And it really speaks to how your consciousness is filled with impressions. Some of them are pleasant, some of them are neutral, some of them, of course, are unpleasant. But all of that is inside you. Tara talked last night about this metaphor of the circle with the line through it. Above the line is everything you're aware of. Below the line is what you're not aware of yet. Joseph Campbell uses that metaphor in his teachings on the hero's journey. And I was reflecting on that, and I was really kind of recognizing how this retreat really is your hero's journey. There are different stages of the hero's journey. First, there's living in the ordinary world. And then there's a calling. There's some vision, there's some calling. And usually there's some resistance to the call. But then there's some spark. And the spark sets you off on your journey. And as you step into the journey, there's at some point a crossing of the threshold where you are committed and you are engaged. And then in the journey, you are beset by obstacles, right and left. You keep going, you persevere, you call on resilience. And then part of the journey is the reward. And then the return back to life. So I'd like to talk a little bit tonight about your journey to honor what called you here to practice. And to talk a little about this practice that you're engaged in of actually arriving. And then to talk also about how do you work with the trials that beset you. As we're heading into the belly of the retreat, this talk is really a practice talk. It's about the different ways you can engage and work with what may be present for you. But also I'd like to talk a little bit about the rewards, a little bit about what you might see as you engage in your journey, in your adventure here. The life of the Buddha is very much this life of the hero's journey. There was a call. And for him, the classic story is the four heavenly messengers, the the recognition of sickness, the recognition of old age, the recognition of death, and then encountering a sannyasi, encountering a renunciate, someone who had consciously stepped away from the busyness of the world to reflect on the qualities of reality. And that sannyasi had such a radiance about him that called him. And of course, there were challenges to even setting out on that call, but he went because he had to. Just as in some way you came here because something in you knew you had to. And of course, he was beset by all kinds of obstacles, and we are in many ways participating in the reward of his insights. So I think it's sometimes very, very helpful just to reflect on what it was that called you to practice. And as you've arrived, just to sense what it's been like to arrive. Has this met your expectations? I know for myself, oftentimes there's a certain excitement about retreat, and then there's a settling in, and then oftentimes there's this thought, I'm paying money for this? And no doubt you have been beset by challenges. That there have been different weather systems of the mind that you have encountered, and at times you have no doubt been beset by doubt, and by ruthless self-criticism, and the resilience, calling on something that has drawn you back to the next set. So I really want to honor not only the call, but how deeply engaged you have been in your practice. I've been really inspired and touched by each of my encounters with you so far during this retreat. I look forward to more. This act of pausing, the courage to step away from the busyness of your life, it is a truly radical act. To pause even for a moment can be radical. To pause for a week, it's extraordinary. It reminded me of a memory back, way back in my ashram days. We did a lot of intensive practice, oftentimes before sunrise. It was in one of the large rooms, or maybe 60 or 70 of us, and we were always looking for ways to inspire ourselves. And one of the teachers thought it would be really interesting to just at random, as we're doing our yoga postures, to just ring a bell and read something from Scripture. So, as I recall, we were in the shoulder stand. So we were all kind of inverted, 70, it was around 70 people, all inverted, and the bell rang. And this voice said something like, to take human form is rare. To take human form and be exposed to the Dharma is even more rare. To take human form and be exposed to the Dharma and contemplate the Dharma is the rarest of the rare. To take human form, to contemplate the Dharma, and to engage actively into the Dharma is the rarest of the rare. And then it went on to say, and of all those who are called to practice, only 1 in 500 years will receive full enlightenment. There's this pause. And then there was this upside down voice in the back of the room that said, gee, thanks, that's encouraging. Which was followed by a really interesting sound of 70 people falling out of the headstand. There's something about this practice that is almost anti-evolutionary. We've evolved by avoiding pain and going toward pleasure. But here, we're actually encouraged to stop, and when you feel pain, to investigate it. And when you feel pleasure, not to pursue it, but to investigate it. And extraordinary things can occur. The classic teaching story, which I imagine many of us have heard. The yogini is meditating in her cave, and 3 demons enter the cave as she's meditating. They're whirling around the room. Horrible sounds, horrible images. And very calmly, she gets up and starts building a little fire. This irritates the demons. They're not getting the reaction they want, so they amp it up a little bit. And again, very calmly, she puts a little tea kettle over the fire. And this enrages the demons, so they throw everything they've got at her. Very calmly, she puts out 3 teacups. Finally, the demons stop, and they say, "What is going on? We are your 3 deepest wounds, your 3 deepest fears. And here you are building a fire, putting a tea kettle on, putting out these teacups. What gives?" And she says, "You've been here before. You'll be here again. So in the meantime, what kind of tea would you like?" In many ways, that's the essence of the practice. As you are relaxing and paying attention, and you are visited by your personal demons, how can you pause and make tea? So in this practice, you're invited to come back again and again and again. And the key point is here, where do you arrive? And you arrive in the body. I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the skillful ways to work with this body. A reading from Robert Hall, a short poem. "Within the body you are wearing, now inside the bones and beating in the heart, lives the one you have been searching for so long. But you must stop running away and shake hands. The meeting doesn't happen without your presence, your participation. The same one waiting for you there is moving in the trees, glistening on the water, growing in the grasses, and lurking in the shadows that you create. You have nowhere to go. The marriage happened long ago. Behold your mate." So this is your body, your life companion. And when you really check out the body, it's a kind of a bizarre phenomena. It's got fur, it's got teeth, it's got claws. As it ages, the fur stops growing where you want it to. It starts growing where you don't want it to. And the invitation, the practice, is to inhabit it fully. So, if you like, close your eyes. What does that mean, to inhabit your body fully? Where do you feel the breath the most predominant right now? When you soften and relax your palms and your fingers and thumbs, can you sense any aliveness here? Any pulse or tingling or vibration? How does your body want you to be with it right now? If you like, you can let the eyes open, or you can remain with them closed. I'm going to be talking about the body and body awareness through the rest of this talk. And you might, from time to time, just refresh a sense of intimate connection, to come back and re-inhabit your portable flesh unit. So in an interview, I was asking someone, well, what are you noticing in your experience? Yogi said, well, the grocery carts in the grocery stores for the little kids that have the steering wheel for the kids, and the kids think they're actually driving around the grocery store. He said, I'm that kid. And maybe you've noticed that. Just the sense of how little control you have over your internal experience. This person went on to say how she said that I am more aware of how scattered my mind is. But I'm also more aware of my capacity to notice it and invite it back. I'm more aware of how unbelievably judgmental my mind is. But I'm also more aware of how I can notice it and remember the practice of metta, of calling on kindness and loving presence. And no doubt you have noticed just how the mind is a little out of control. And you may feel as if you're less concentrated than you were before you arrived here. But you may actually be more present than before. We're really in a process of moving from scattered attention to more and more sustained attention in the here and now. And this becomes such an integral part of spiritual practice, the gathering of awareness. So, of course, concentration becomes a critical part of practice. I'd like to do just a little review of the anchors. So if you like, you can again close your eyes. This retreat is entitled Intimacy with Life, and that is an inquiry in any given moment. When you sense the breath, again, where do you feel it right now? Where is it most predominant? As you sense the movement of the breath, is it possible in any small, intimate little way that you might let go or soften? If you were to soften the belly, can you detect perhaps just a little more intimately how you can sense that rise and that fall? How intimately can you rest your attention on that momentary presence of stillness between the breath in and the breath out? Is it possible to sense the breath in the trachea or through the sinus cavities in your head? Can you sense the movement of the lungs against your back, against the ribs of your back? If you turn your attention to sound, is it possible to drop the labeling of sound and actually feel the sound vibrations? And as you sense on the inside, is it possible to detect pulse or tingling, vibration? Subtle energy flow on the inside. You may notice how concentration can be enhanced by relaxing even more. Is it possible right now to soften or relax or let go just a little bit more? And what happens when you investigate this? You might deepen the breath. If you like, you might open the eyes, or you can remain with them closed. There is a quality of attention that is dedicated to keeping us alive and safe. When you're walking down the street, there is something in your awareness that is basically saying, don't die, don't die, don't die. You're interpreting what might be a threat. That's a very, very helpful function. What I find when I begin this process of softening and letting go, that there are times there can sometimes be a startle effect. Maybe you've noticed that? Where suddenly you're scanning again, just to sense that you're okay. So there's something quite profound in this practice of softening. And have you noticed that there may be particular parts of your body where the tension tends to collect? For some, it can be a furrowing of the eyes. For some, there's tension in the jaw. For some, kind of a clenching in the belly. One practice I have found helpful for myself, I've just noticed that as I'm exploring this practice of really resting attention in the body, that there are particular areas where I tend to hold tension. And sometimes it can be really helpful, for me anyway, to touch into those places. One area in particular for me is the belly. The belly is where we digest not only our food, but our whole life experience. And oftentimes, if I really bring my attention to softening in the belly, I'll sense that sort of undefended, sort of 2-year-old letting your belly just hang out there experience. And then I'll check back 2 minutes later and everything is tight again. Stephen Levine used to offer just a very soft mantra of soft belly as a way of just coming back to that undefended resting in the body. Quite often I find that it's very helpful to check in a couple of key areas of the body. And just very briefly, if you like, you can close your eyes. If you let the forehead soften, let the forehead feel smooth and soften the muscles around the eyes, just notice what happens. If you relax your tongue and let your tongue fill your lower jaw, and in particular, if you relax the root of your tongue down into your throat, can you sense perhaps a softening through the mechanism of the jaw? When you investigate the belly and the lower back, could anything here soften? If you soften and relax the palms and the soles of the feet, just notice if there's any internal felt shift of presence in the body. And again, you might let the breath deepen. And if you like, you can let the eyes open. relaxing and softening into the body is literally relaxing and softening into the here and now. The mind, of course, is leaping into the future and reviewing the past, but the body only knows the present tense. And the inquiry is, how intimately can I rest in the body? I'm always surprised. I'm always looking for peak performance tips in my life. Try to navigate my life by being effective at the peak times and resting in the trough times and so forth. And I've always tried that technology when it comes to meditation retreats. And quite often I'll sort of have my checklist. Am I rested? Check. Am I hydrated? Check. And I work out my stress by doing some walking? Check. And I'll be thinking, I'm just going to nail this next set. And I'll walk in, it'll be one of the most monkey mind meditations I've ever had. Other times, I'll feel grumpy, haven't slept well, irritated. I'm even thinking, why am I even bothering walking into the next set? And sometimes those are the most profound, spacious moments. So the best mantra I have found for myself on retreat, keep going. And you may have noticed how many times in the last few days have you been surprised by some random memory or some random thought? Maybe surprised by moments of clarity. I know some have noticed like deep hypnagogic states of sort of like dream-like states where different fragments of thoughts and words are passing through. Those are all part of the weather systems that we experience. But there's something quite profound in the practice. And that is you don't really know what is going to happen in the next breath. I understand that Joseph Goldstein did a long sit, and quite often he'll share some pithy insights. And I always listen carefully, how I can tune in and get the goods. And one year, his pithy insight after retreat was, anything can happen at any time. But isn't that an amazing takeaway? So just a little 1-minute Zen pop quiz, if you would. You can close your eyes again. And just to reflect on that. Anything can happen at any time. Can you cultivate that level of attentiveness, of possibility? There's something about the practice that invites us into this willingness to be surprised. Back to the metaphor of the circle with the line through it. The more deeply you relax, the more deeply you pay attention, the more the line will move. And no doubt you have felt things, noticed things that you hadn't noticed before. And as you relax and as you pay attention, things begin to come more to the surface. But they're not clear yet. They're vague, they're unformed. And that's where we cultivate these two wings. Cultivating wisdom, the capacity to see clearly. The willingness to sense something that may not be clear yet, but to hang out there with that level of curiosity and possibility. And also to have ready access to that sense of empathy and kindness and compassion to hold what arises. And so we have the practice of rain to recognize, to realize what's presenting in any given moment, to call on the capacity to allow, to make room for the mystery of what's coming in, and then the capacity to actively investigate, to lean in, to have tea with whatever energy is beginning to arise, and to meet what you find with a quality of nourishment. So I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the skillful means for the eye of rain, for the investigation, because the primary investigation, just as you're invited back to the body, the primary investigation is inside the body. And there are some certain distinctions that I have found helpful in my practice. But I'd like to tell you a little story of working with someone on retreat. And this yogini had noticed that she was having a lot of difficulty being present. And primarily, she began to notice how her mind was constantly moving forward, constantly anticipating the next thing. And it was very somewhat scattered, but pretty consistent. It was either moving to what she was going to do when the retreat was over, or what the next meal might be, or whether she was going to sleep that night, when she might take the next shower, etc., etc. Can anyone relate? And she began to notice that as we investigated this, that was a mental state. You know, that leaning forward, the planning, the anticipating. But when she began to check into the body, how her body was actually holding that, she realized there is some kind of chronic anxiety in there. So she recognized the mental state of leaning forward, of planning. And then she began to see that her body held that as a form of tension. And that tension was around the heart, it was kind of down in the belly, it was kind of in the throat, right along the core of the body. So we decided to explore this. And she felt felt okay. She was ready to explore it. And as Pat said, just to reiterate, in the practice of rain, it is not uncommon when you are deeply relaxing and invoking non-judging awareness, this quality of mindfulness, anything and everything that's undigested in your life will present itself. Quite often it's just enough. Sometimes it can feel like it's too much. And if you encounter something that has really two qualities, where there's fear and helplessness, those two, fear and helplessness, are trauma. And there's little trauma and there's big trauma. But when you encounter that fear and helplessness, you may notice that there are certain physiological responses where you may feel flooded, or you feel like it's too much. And here, one of the most critical things, if you elect to investigate something that's arising, is to really ask yourself, does it feel okay? Does it feel safe to be with this? And then listen. You may find sometimes just by asking that question, you'll get a sense of affirmation. It's okay. But if you really have a sense, this is not the right time, it's very skillful to let it know you see it. Let it know another time when the conditions are different. When the conditions are more favorable, your intention is to be with it. But it's very skillful to turn your attention. To focus on another anchor, to maybe get a cup of tea or to go for a walk. But if you have the sense that it feels safe, which it did for her, then we could move into the investigation aspect, exploring kind of the somatic experience. For many people, we have a good sense of our biography. We have a good sense of the story a good sense of the causes and conditions of our life. And this investigation is really, it's about the biology. It's about how your nervous system holds an experience, and to explore how you can bring both wisdom, kindness, empathy, and compassion to that practice. So she began to explore this anxiety. And she described it as like a hypervigilant bird. Like the energy was really jumpy, that she could feel this jumpiness in her chest, the jumpiness in her throat, it kind of unsettled in the belly. And so she just noticed that. She let it know that she saw it. And something about that created a little bit of a shift. And she explored, well, can I just hold this with a little loving presence? A little bit of empathy, a little bit of compassion. And the fluttering kind of shifted. But then a deep feeling of sadness began to arise. And she began to feel a heaviness. And the heaviness was through the heart. She could feel it down through her sternum. And as she was with it, just being with it, she said, how much of my life have I missed by feeling so scared and feeling so anxious? The sadness she felt shifted into more of a grief, which she described as kind of a heaviness, almost like a bitterness inside. And again, recognizing, just seeing it clearly, sensing how to hold it, how to be with it. Tara mentioned last night some of the questions that you can inquire when you're in this investigation. And one of the questions I find so helpful, and you'll need to customize them for yourself, is that when you can locate how your body holds something, is to ask, how does this want me to be with it right now? And then listen. So she asked that question. How does this feeling of dark, dense, bitter grief want me to be with it right now? And the response can vary quite a bit. For her, it just wanted to be seen. For some, it may be wanting some tender attention. And so she simply rested with that grief. And after a while, it began to lift. There is a sense of lightness. And in that lifting, in that lightness, I asked another question, which sometimes can be helpful, sometimes not. But I asked that feeling, that feeling of anxiety, of the hypervigilance and that sadness and grief, is there a sense of how old that is? And she said, it's really, really young. And then she had a memory. Her mother, when she was really, really young, 3 or 4, she said, your dad and I have to decide if we're going to go on vacation or if we're going to buy a new washing machine. We don't have the money for both. And then she said that created such a clench of fear for her. It was the first time that she felt like there wasn't enough, and a helplessness. There's nothing I can do. And she said it's like that fear just set up camp inside. Like it just stayed and it built fortifications. And she began to sense how much of her life was organized around that deep set anxiety, around that deep set kind of chronic fear. There's a beautiful piece that Jack Kornfield talks about. How there are times, again, not all the time, but there are times when you may encounter some some memory or some condition, and when you deeply investigate it, when you're really, really with it, and you can sense the layers of it, it's rarely just one emotion. That sense of anxiety had hypervigilance, it had sadness, it had fear, it had helplessness, all those different components. But you can inquire from time to time just how old that is. And then, and this is such a beautiful piece, to imagine you can make contact with that little being and just invite that little being on your lap. And just sense what that little being needs. That is not an intellectual process. It drops right under to that visceral sense, that aliveness of connection. So that story is a pretty dramatic story. And quite often, not every investigation has fireworks like that one. But it does illustrate the process. That as you are practicing, and when you find something that feels persistent, physical pain, emotional turmoil, a mental state that just seems really, really persistent, to pause, to recognize it. Sense if you can name it. And then sincerely ask yourself, does it feel safe? Does it feel right? Is it timely to really have tea with this? And then, if so, it can be very, very helpful to explore this investigation. So, a few things around investigating this aliveness of what's often called the felt sense, of how your body holds a thought or a memory or an emotion. Quite often you'll find it in the midline and the core of your body, the mouth, the throat, the heart, the lungs, the belly. And as you turn your attention to this relaxing and resting and sensing in the body, you'll notice how this felt sense will arise in a couple different ways. One is it may be strong and unmistakable. You can't miss it. It's the lump in your throat. It's that twisted feeling in your guts like something horrible is happening. It's the ache in your heart. It's the burning around your eyes as if you're about to cry. Another is that sometimes it'll flicker. You'll just sort of get a flicker or a wave of sadness might come through, but then you look and you can't find it. And the third category, and this is where the practice of relax and pay attention is so critical. Because something is arising below the line, it will be vague and unformed. It'll feel kind of amorphous. And I find kind of in my own training that this magic word of something. There's something just heavy and dense around my heart. Recognize it. Sense if you can just hold it in a quality of friendliness or compassion. Another very, very helpful technique when you're doing this investigation is to check out if the words that you are using to describe it really resonate with that feeling. You may feel some sensation, maybe some heat or flickering in your chest and your throat, and your mind may say, this is anger. Well, then you can check in, say, does the word anger, does it resonate with these sensations? And you may find, no, that's not it. Oh, this is disappointment. And you may find that word suddenly opens up a subtle or not so subtle distinction as you're making room for something to arise above the line so it can be seen and felt and honored. This listening to the felt sense. We are so trained through our minds, through comparing and judging and figuring things out. There are two metaphors I find very helpful as you deepen your practice here. One is that what arises is like a wild animal at the edge of the woods. If you've ever seen an animal at the edge of the woods, it knows you see it. You know that it sees you. You can't chase it. You can't seduce it in. But you can let it know you see it. And that sets up a very delicate, very interesting relationship with it. The other way of sensing is to imagine that you're holding a really young child or an animal that is hurting but doesn't have words. That level of attentiveness, as in the Metta Sutta, as if you're a mother caring for a child, that level of attentiveness may not only give you a little information, but will give you a resonance of connection that can feel very deep and very intimate. A question that often comes up is, should I be working on things? Should I be actively investigating everything that comes up? And what I found in my own experience is no. It'll find you. And there's a level of trust in the practice. I love a beautiful quote from Father Thomas Keating, who kind of articulated Christian contemplative prayer, where he talked about how meditation is a practice of consent. It is a practice of yes. And so as different weather systems pass through, there will be moments of clarity. The sun is out, a sense of ease. There'll be times of fog, of density. And then sometimes storms come through. And it becomes a very powerful practice of really investing in a sense of faith in practice. That as you relax, and as you allow, as you take this seat of the observer to allow things to arise and shift and fall away, that whatever needs to come in its own organic way will find you. So the Buddha said, I declare that this body, with its perceptions and thoughts, that there is the world, the origin of the world, the cessation of the world, and the path leading to the cessation of the world. Or as another tradition says, everything you seek is found within. And this becomes, again, a radical practice. How radical it is to pause. And how radical it is to turn your attention inside, to explore this amazing world of the body. And the question then becomes, well, what is happening in the body? I'd like to just to say a few words before we close with a short meditation about a particular distinction that's referred to as Vedana. And Vedana is a fundamental aspect of how you experience the body. On one level, everything is just vast, undifferentiated energy, just particles and waves. But as you open to this presence in the body, you will notice how everything will form into three fundamental categories of sensation. And they fall in the category of unpleasant. All that which is interpreted as unpleasant. All that which is felt and interpreted as pleasant. And all that is interpreted as everything that is in between, the neutral sensations. And it become a very interesting form of practice to let your attention simply come to that play of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, and how you're relating to it. I was once very inspired by a teacher by the name of U Tejaniya. And on many of his retreats, his practice was really to just notice that play of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, and how you're relating to it. That's the practice. And I had this experience where I had to fly to teach somewhere. And so I just signed up for the TSA pass, whatever it's called, the fast pass or whatever. Yeah, pre-check, yeah. And so I got to the airport, and I was really excited because I had my pre-check. I couldn't wait. And so I checked my app on my iPhone, and it wasn't there. And then suddenly I noticed and I felt this clench. I was really tuning into I thought, oh, God, this is horrible. So then I had to run to the other line. Oh, this tension. And then there was someone there at the end of the line, and the person looked kind of mean. I was like, oh, no. But then I went through, and she was from Togo, and I had lived in West Africa, and we talked in French a little bit. I was like, oh, this is so much fun. It felt great. And then so she directed me to a line. I went to that line, and I realized, oh, no, this line is twice as long as that other line. Oh, suddenly I tightened up again. But then somehow the line that was longer was going faster than the other line. Oh, that felt really, really good. And then I had to check in, and the TSA agent, again, looked really, really nasty. Like, oh, no, I'd like to kind of defend myself. But it turned out he was a really nice guy. He offered me a nice day. Oh, well, God, that was really nice. So then I took my pack. I was unloading it, and I often travel with this big bamboo flute. And the TSA agent said, "What's that?" I go, "Oh, no. Now I got to explain this." And so I explained it to him. He said, "That is so cool. Where can I get one?" Then I felt really, really good. By the time I got through that line, I was completely exhausted. But it becomes a very interesting element. Again, as you relax and as you pay attention, just to notice. There are two elements of the practice. One is, can you be aware of what's happening as it's happening? And can you be aware of your relationship to what's happening? And as we move into the belly of the retreat, sensitizing yourself to that can be very, very interesting. And you may find there's a noise outside that for some might create judgment. For others, it might be comforting. To slow down and sense if you can feel that can be enormously helpful. So, in this practice, as we've said so many times, you will find your own way. This is not, as Pat said, a paint-by-numbers practice. What you do have in any given moment is the capacity to pause again and to relax and to feel and just to be awake in the body. Every time you do that, you will arrive. And you open again to that sense of possibility in any given moment. Let's close with a short meditation. And you might reflect way back when to the cellist who found that he could effortlessly play a song that he had heard in the womb. And to sense for yourself how within this body is contained all of the conditions of your life. and to sense how in this body, as you relax, as you pay attention, you will notice this subtle play of that which you perceive as unpleasant, as that which will arise as pleasant, and that which will be presented as neutral. And within this entire play, there is a quality of the one who knows. There is a capacity for seeing clearly into the nature of things. There is a capacity to open your heart to embrace anything and everything that may arise. We'll close with this reading from John O'Donohue entitled Blessing for the Senses. May your body be blessed. May you realize that your body is a faithful and beautiful friend of your soul. And may you be peaceful and joyful and recognize that your senses are sacred thresholds. May you realize that holiness is mindful, gazing, feeling, hearing, and touching. May your senses gather you and bring you home. May your senses always enable you to celebrate the universe and the mystery and possibilities in your presence here. May the eros of the earth bless you.